This MCP 5-minute moment is brought to you by the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. This is the second in a series of short videos which provide an overview of the waste site cleanup program here in Massachusetts under the regulations known as the Massachusetts Contingency Plan, or MCP. In episode 1, we gave a broad overview of the entire process from the start to closing out sites. In episodes 2 through 10, we'll focus on each individual step along the way and provide a little bit more detail. Today, we'll talk about notification. While the state cleanup law, that's Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 21E, gives the department broad authority to address releases of oil and hazardous material to the environment, we do prioritize what we want to know about and when. For example, we don't require notification for the large number of very small spills and releases of oil and hazardous material that occur on a day-to-day basis. We want to focus our resources and the resources of the private sector on those spills and releases that are potentially problematic, large releases of toxic compounds, or spills and releases that are unknown and really should be investigated. Think of notification as the trigger. Notification is what triggers additional investigation and possibly action to remediate or clean up a site. In this video, we're not going to get deep into the weeds of the details of notification, but the regulations at 310 CMR 40.0300 or subpart C of the MCP, describe all of the requirements associated with notification. The regulations cover the who, what, when, where, why, and how of notification. We'll cover some of this in the next few minutes, but remember, go to the regulations for what the actual requirements are. So who is obligated to notify DEP in case of a spill or a release of oil and hazardous material? The law is very broad and contains a lot of nuance and exemption, but to oversimplify, anybody who is the owner of a location or is operating or running the activities at that location, anybody involved in the storage or transport of oil or hazardous material, anybody that may have a right-of-way on a property, and anybody else that the law says is liable is obligated to notify DEP of a reportable release. And I'll say this over and over, but it's extremely important here. You should check the law and the regulations to find out if you actually have an obligation to notify. Now we'll cover each of the different notification categories, starting the 2-hour notifications. These are what you might think of as environmental emergencies, things that we want to know about now because we need to respond now. The 2-hour notifications require immediate response actions to be taken to address the problem. Sudden releases, or spills, are an example of a release that requires 2-hour notification if that spill is greater than a reportable quantity, or if the spill involves an unknown quantity that may be greater than the RQ. Think of a gasoline tanker truck overturning on a highway, spilling its contents. And what's a reportable quantity, you ask? It's the amount that triggers notification. Reportable quantities are listed in the Massachusetts Oil and Hazardous Materials List, which is in regulation at 310 CMR 40.1600. It's also available online and searchable. Remember that overturned gasoline tanker truck on the last slide? The reportable quantity for gasoline is 10 gallons. There are other conditions that require quick action and thus timely notification under 2 hours. These include releases of surface water, releases that threaten drinking water supplies, and conditions that might pose an imminent hazard to public health or the environment. The next reporting category involves 72-hour notifications. 72-hour notifications generally involves those kind of conditions that we want to know about soon because it's more cost and time effective to deal with the problem now rather than wait for it to get bigger. These notifications also require immediate response actions to be taken after notification. A failed screening test during the removal of an underground storage tank is an example of this. You would want to begin the investigation, begin the immediate response action, while the pit in the excavation is still open, rather than complete the removal of the tank, cover it all back, and then come back sometime in the future to begin the investigation. 72-hour notifications are also required where you have potential threats to drinking water supplies or to indoor air. In these cases, you'd want to begin the investigation soon and find out if there's an actual exposure and an actual problem. Another example is something we call a condition of substantial release migration. Substantial release migration describes several situations in which contamination has the potential for moving quickly through the environment, and dealing with it now is better than letting it spread and dealing with a bigger problem later. The last reporting category is the 120-day notification category. These are typically historic conditions, meaning releases that happened a number of years ago, and we do want to know about them, and we want them evaluated in a comprehensive and thoughtful way. In some cases, there is the option to take a limited removal action, which may eliminate the need for notification. We'll talk about that in a second. 120-day notifications are triggered by taking environmental samples in soil and groundwater, and getting the results back from the laboratory and finding that the levels are greater than the applicable reportable concentration, or RCs. There's also a reporting requirement for non-aqueous phase liquid, or NAPL, at certain measurable thicknesses. Again, you ask, what are reportable concentrations? And again, I answer, they're on the Massachusetts Oil and Hazardous Material List. There are 4 categories of reportable concentrations, 2 for soil and 2 categories for groundwater. RCS1 are those locations that are close to sensitive locations, such as within 500 feet of a home or school or a park. The RCS2 category applies to everywhere else. The groundwater reportable concentrations work in the same way. If you are close to or in an area that's being protected for its current use as drinking water or its potential future use as drinking water, then the RCGW1 category applies. If you're not in those areas, then RCGW2 applies. You can use the same search application on our website to get the reportable concentrations for any given chemical. Earlier I had mentioned that limited removal actions may be taken at certain locations where there's a 120-day notification obligation. LRAs are really geared to dealing with and getting rid of small problems. They can be used at these historic releases where there's only soil contamination and the volume of affected soil is very small. And you have to do it within that 120-day notification window. If you can excavate out that soil and dispose of it properly, then notification would not be required. The MCP also lists certain conditions where notification is not required, even though you might trigger one of those 2-hour, 72-hour, or 120-day notification thresholds. There's a list of these exemptions at 310 CMR 40.0317. The list includes specific exemptions that are contained in the cleanup law, Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 21E, as well as other conditions that don't make sense to cover under the cleanup law, such as releases that are permitted by other programs or elevated natural background conditions. Finally, a short word on how to notify us. MassDEP has an emergency response number 1-888-304-1133 that is staffed 24/7. Any 2-hour or 72-hour notification should first come in through that phone line. Subsequent written follow-up for the 2-hour and 72-hour notifications should use our EDP, our electronic filing system, specifically BWSC Form 103. 120-day notifications should come in exclusively through the EDP system. This concludes our 5-minute overview of notification under the Massachusetts Contingency Plan. The entire series of 10 introductory videos to the MCP will be available on MassDEP's YouTube channel.